Hello my dear sewing friends, it's Alisa here, and in this video I would love to share with you 5 sewing machine secrets that perhaps you didn't know. Now I did say 5, but I think there's going to be a little bit more because I always give you a little bit of extra along the way. And as always, whenever we talk about any sort of tips or tricks or hacks, usually they solve a very particular problem. So I will make sure to show you real life examples of when and how I use these hacks and these sewing machine secrets. This is pretty fascinating. Now, did you know that you can actually sew with your sewing machine without using a spool on top and by only using a bobbin thread? That's right, let me show you how it works. I'm going to use green thread here, so hopefully you can see a little bit better. And first we're going to thread our sewing machine as per usual, so the bobbin and the top thread as well. This is done so that way we can pick up the bobbin thread and bring it up. Once the bobbin thread is pulled up, we can remove the top thread completely. And now comes the craziest part. We're going to use the bobbin thread to thread our machine backwards. In my case, I've started by threading my sewing machine needle backwards. Then I have these 2 little thread guides. Then of course the tension disc and all the way to where the spool usually is at. And sometimes for this technique, you might want to loosen up your thread tension just by a tiny bit, but that will also depend on what kind of thread and what kind of fabric you're using. So it's not always necessary, but something to keep in mind. And before we start sewing, you want to make sure that you have pulled up enough of the bobbin thread to accommodate the length of the seam that you're going to be doing. If you're sewing a dart using this technique, you're going to place your folded fabric right underneath your presser foot, slightly on the angle, and you're going to start at the dart point, so at the tip of the dart instead of what we usually do starting at the dart leg. So go ahead and lower the needle right at the dart point and slowly start stitching your dart. Once done, this is what you're going to have. So we sewed a dart, but this technique is also really great for pin tuck. So if you're doing a pin tuck, everything is exactly the same. The first step is slightly different. So I still have my upper thread over here. I'm placing my fabric underneath my presser foot, lowering. Then I'm going to lower the needle and bring it back up. And now I'm going to lift up the presser foot again and pick up the bobbin thread through the fabric that I have over here. So that way the bobbin thread now is on top. And I'm going to repeat exactly the same steps as I did. So I'm going to thread my sewing machine backwards using the bobbin thread. Once done, we are ready to sew our pin tuck. And this is what it looks from the right side. This is what it looks from the wrong side. And as you see, no back stitching, no knots, just a very clean start of your work. As you might know, I absolutely love sewing books, so I did pick up this technique from one of them. So I will leave the name and the publisher of the sewing book in the description for you guys if you want to take a look. And needless to say that this is a very niche technique, but this is a really great way how to do darts and how to do pin tucks when you're working with see-through and very delicate fabrics that are transparent. So that way you don't have to worry about anything showing through and your work is really, really clean. Now, of course, you can use this technique beyond the sheer and transparent fabric. So let me show you a little example. So I just recently finished this blouse that I made from a really, really lightweight cotton, and I wanted some sort of accent right here at the neckline, but I didn't want anything too big or something that would draw too much attention from the beautiful print. So I decided on a couple of pin tucks, and pin tucks over here were completed using exactly the same technique that I just shared with you. I really love how this blouse came out. I love the sleeves, and you know I've been making these sleeves for quite some time, and it really works well with a variety of different lightweight fabrics. So I have this little remnant over here. Well, it's not as little, but it is a remnant, and it is quite sheer. So if I do make a very similar blouse out of this fabric, then the pin tucks or the darts will definitely be made using the same technique. Now here's an extra tip to avoid backstitching at the beginning of your seams in certain situations. You can actually decrease the length of your stitches at the very beginning and then bring them back to normal as soon as you've done maybe 3-5 stitches or so. That way at the very beginning of a seam, your threads aren't going to come undone. Just to be on a safe side, you can always drop a little bit of fray check if your fabric allows that. Alright, moving on to tip number 2, and I truly hope that this next one is going to entice you to create some beautiful embroidery designs by using your regular sewing machine. Let me show you. You don't need to have anything fancy. In fact, you can do it with a sewing machine that has the most basic decorative stitches. Now here I have my sewing machine that's been with me for over a decade, and here a brand new sewing machine that's been with me for a couple of months, and I've done this technique on both of them. The thing is that when most people use decorative stitches, they use it as a standalone stitch, like for example here on this little pocket. But what I do is I play around, experiment, and I combine these stitches in order to create these really beautiful embroidery designs. Now once you have settled on the repeat pattern of your decorative stitches and you've decided on the design, then you can really let your creativity loose and you can create some really one-of-a-kind, unique garments, accessories, decor, or whatever your heart desires. So for example, here I decided to embroider an entire cap sleeve, and I really love the combination of green and blue, so this is what I played with here. And by the way, the stitches that I used on this cap sleeve are really basic, so I'm sure that your sewing machine has them as well. Now in the case of this white blouse, I used the combination of these decorative stitches in a slightly different way, but I really think that that blue decorative element really brings out the white and makes it pop. Now I know that these are just two examples, but I really think that this little sewing machine secret, if you will, has a lot of potential. So one thing that really comes to mind is that, let's say you're making a button-up shirt, then you can embroider cuffs or a collar or a bust pocket or perhaps a back yoke. And there are so many different applications where you can use this and really make your garment pop. Now here are 3 extra tips when you're working with your decorative stitches in this capacity. Number 1, I find that using embroidery thread instead of just regular all-purpose thread gives a much smoother surface in the end. You can of course use your all-purpose thread without a problem for your decorative stitches. I just find when you're doing a lot of decorative stitches, that embroidery thread and using it definitely pays off. Number 2, when you are using decorative stitches as sort of this like fill for an entire pattern piece, like I did on that green top, I did the full sleeve, then you definitely want to make sure that you cut your pattern piece a little bit bigger, because this many decorative stitches in a row do tighten up the fabric a little bit. Or perhaps what you can do is embroider, let's say, a square or a rectangle, and then cut your pattern pieces out of it, whichever is easier, whichever makes more sense for you. And tip number 3 is that depending on what fabric you're using and how many decorative stitches in a row you're going to be doing and the placement of them, you might want to think about what kind of interfacing you're going to be applying to sort of back it up. So as always, think ahead, because that really saves the day whenever it all comes to putting it together. Tip number 3 is beyond easy, super simple, yet very helpful, at least for me. So let's say there's a situation where you're working on a garment and you want to create that beautiful and bold top stitching as an accent. But for, whatever is the circumstance, maybe you're running out of time, maybe like in my case, you just can't get your hands on the right color of top stitching thread because you live in a smaller town, or perhaps there's no haberdashery shops around. So you can actually mimic top stitching by using what you already have. So just regular thread, regular sewing needle, but use a triple straight stretch stitch. Try saying that 3 times. All jokes aside, it really is a great alternative, and you have heard me talk about this triple straight stretch stitch before, because it is one of the stitches that I use when I'm working with more stable knits, where I want the seam to be super sturdy but still retain a little bit of that stretch. This is also one of the stitches that is really great to use for crotch reinforcement as well. Here is a fresh off the sewing machine example. All stitches done with this mustard yellow are done using this technique. So if you haven't used this stitch before, perhaps this is the right time to play around with it, explore, and see if you like it. Now for this next sewing machine secret, have you ever wondered what is the purpose of this little knob on your presser foot? Turns out that this is a self-leveling zigzag foot, and I have one of these for each one of my machines, and this little knob is just amazing. The purpose of it is to make your life easier when you're sewing over bulky seams, like for example what I did right over here. So let's go ahead and pin it and I'll show you that in action. I think it makes more sense if we look at it from the side. So as you can see, there's quite a big difference between the thickness of fabric on this side and on this side where I have folded all of these layers together. First, we're going to start stitching as per usual. Once you have reached this thick spot, let's go ahead and stop, leave your needle inside of your project, and lift up your presser foot. Once your presser foot is up, I'm after this little black knob that has a little spring in it. So go ahead and press it, and then lower your presser foot again. So that way now it entirely rests on this bulky spot that you're just about to stitch over. I know it might be hard to see, so here I've added some additional layers so that way we can observe a little bit better. So now if I lower my presser foot as is, you can see that the bottom of the presser foot rests on the single layer of fabric and is tilted towards these multiple layers. Now this is what it looks like after I have engaged my self-leveling presser foot. And now continue sewing over this seam. As a result, you get nice and consistent stitches as you transition from a single layer of fabric to multiple layers of fabric and going over these bulky areas. If you have one of these, and these have many names, I think mine is called bulky seam jumper, this serves a very similar purpose. Two quick things to know: this spring will pop back up once you have stitched over the bulky area and are back to the leveled surface. And I also find that this spring only locks in place, 1, when the presser foot is up, and 2, only in a level position. Once you have locked the spring, then you can lower your presser foot. Now, did you know that the buttonhole foot actually has more than one use? Take a look in your sewing machine manual and you might find that your sewing machine has this darning stitch. Now, in my case, this stitch is made to be used with a buttonhole foot, and this is a quick and easy peasy solution for a very fast mending and revival of your clothes. Mending isn't your thing, then this could really help you. Now, I truly hope that you enjoyed seeing what else your sewing machine can do, and perhaps you learned something new. Now, if you want to see how I made this sweater from fabric scraps and a scarf, then definitely click right over here, and I'll see you in the next video very, very soon. Until next time, happy, thoughtful, and creative sewing. I'll see you soon. Bye!